It was just after sunset when the storm turned the empty mountain highway into a river of rain. Visibility had almost disappeared. Cars rushed past with headlights cutting through the darkness, each driver focused only on reaching home safely. Hidden beneath the roar of thunder was a black luxury SUV that had slammed into a guardrail after swerving to avoid a fallen tree. Smoke drifted from beneath the hood, while one of the rear wheels hung over the edge of a steep ravine. Inside sat a man wearing an expensive suit. His forehead was bleeding, and one of his legs was trapped beneath the crushed dashboard. His phone had been thrown somewhere outside the vehicle, and every attempt to free himself only made the pain worse. The rain grew heavier, washing blood across his face. For the first time in many years, all the wealth he possessed meant absolutely nothing. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Several vehicles slowed just long enough to look before speeding away. Nobody wanted to risk stopping on the dangerous mountain road. A few miles away, Daniel Harper, a hard-working single father of a 10-year-old daughter named Lily, was driving home in his old pickup truck after finishing a double shift repairing farm equipment. Money was always tight. Every dollar he earned went toward rent, groceries, and Lily's school supplies. His truck barely stayed on the road, yet he kept it running because replacing it was impossible. As he rounded a sharp curve, his headlights caught the damaged SUV. He immediately slammed on the brakes. Without thinking about the rain or the danger, Daniel grabbed an old flashlight, wrapped a rope around his waist, and climbed down the slippery embankment. The SUV creaked dangerously. One wrong move could send it crashing into the ravine below. Daniel ignored the risk. He pulled at the bent driver's door until his hands bled against the twisted metal. After several exhausting attempts, the door finally gave way. The injured man looked up through blurry eyes. Daniel calmly told him to stay awake. Working carefully, he used a small emergency jack from his truck to lift part of the crushed dashboard, just enough to free the man's trapped leg. It took almost 15 minutes. Every second felt longer than the last. Finally, Daniel managed to pull the stranger from the wreck moments before the SUV slid over the edge, crashing into the darkness below. The explosion echoed through the valley. Daniel dragged the injured man to safety and covered him with his own jacket, despite shivering in the freezing rain. The ambulance arrived nearly half an hour later. Paramedics rushed the victim away. Before anyone could ask questions, Daniel quietly walked back to his old truck. He didn't ask for a reward. He didn't even leave his name. He simply drove home because Lily was waiting for dinner. The injured stranger never saw the faded family photo taped to Daniel's dashboard. He never learned who had saved his life. But destiny had already begun writing a story neither man could imagine. 3 days later, newspapers across the country reported that billionaire entrepreneur Alexander Pierce had survived a near-fatal mountain accident thanks to an unknown hero who disappeared before anyone could identify him. Alexander owned one of the nation's largest technology companies. His businesses employed thousands of people, and his fortune was worth billions. Yet none of his security team, assistants, or investigators could discover who had rescued him. Alexander couldn't stop thinking about the man who had chosen compassion over comfort. He ordered his staff to search every emergency report, every surveillance camera, and every witness statement. Weeks passed. Nothing. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to his ordinary life. His daughter Lily noticed fresh cuts on his hands and asked what had happened. Daniel smiled and simply said he had helped someone who needed it. Lily hugged him proudly. She had always believed her father was the strongest man in the world. Life remained difficult. The repair shop where Daniel worked announced layoffs after losing several major contracts. Soon Daniel became unemployed. Bills piled higher every week. The landlord warned that rent was overdue. Daniel secretly skipped meals so Lily would always have enough to eat. Despite everything, he refused to complain. He continued helping elderly neighbors repair fences, fixing bicycles for local children without charging money, and volunteering at the community food pantry. Kindness remained his greatest wealth. One afternoon, Alexander personally visited the mountain road where the accident had happened. An elderly tow truck driver remembered seeing an old blue pickup leaving the area. That tiny clue restarted the search. Security teams spent weeks checking garages, repair shops, and small towns across the region. Finally, they found a mechanic who recognized the description. Daniel Harper, a single father, recently unemployed, living in a modest rented house. Alexander expected to find someone chasing money. Instead, he found a man quietly mowing an elderly widow's lawn without accepting payment. Alexander watched from across the street. The billionaire stood completely speechless. His rescuer had almost nothing, yet he kept giving everything. For the first time in years, Alexander realized true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts. The next morning, a black luxury car stopped outside Daniel's small home. Neighbors peeked through their windows. Daniel stepped outside, confused. Alexander Pierce walked toward him with a slight limp, carrying no bodyguards and no cameras. For several silent moments, neither man spoke. Then Alexander simply said 2 words. "Thank you." Daniel smiled. "You don't owe me anything." Alexander's eyes filled with emotion. "You saved my life." Daniel shook his head gently. "I only did what anyone should do." "But they didn't," Alexander quietly replied. "They drove away." Alexander offered Daniel a large check. Daniel looked at it before handing it back. "I can't accept money for helping someone." Alexander stood frozen. No one had ever refused millions from him. Instead, Daniel made a simple request. "If you really want to thank me, help people who need it more than I do." Those words changed Alexander forever. Over the following months, he quietly purchased the struggling repair shop where Daniel had worked and reopened it with better salaries, modern equipment, and full benefits for every employee. He created scholarships for single-parent families. He funded local schools. He expanded community food programs. Without announcing it publicly, he also paid off Daniel's mortgage, created an education trust for Lily's future, and ensured Daniel would never have to worry about medical bills again. When Daniel learned what had happened, he was overwhelmed. Alexander simply smiled. "You refused a reward, so I invested in your kindness instead." Years later, the community became known as one of the most generous towns in the region. People often wondered how so much compassion had begun there. Only Daniel and Alexander knew the answer. It had started on a rainy mountain road, where one exhausted single father chose to stop when everyone else kept driving. Because true kindness never asks for recognition. It simply changes lives. And sometimes, the quietest act of compassion echoes farther than the loudest display of wealth.